Eric, are we waiting for someone else?
Okay, we're ready to start. First of all, good afternoon, dear friends and colleagues. We are extremely glad to welcome you all here today. And today's topic is extremely important, crucial, and very important for our school because, first of all, Higher School of Economics and the Department of World Economy and International Affairs are one of the leading schools in studying the Eurasian economic integration. And furthermore, a few years ago, on this faculty was justified Russian pillar to the east. We extremely welcome the format of this event. It's very good to speak about such topics in very let's say in such a multipolar view side, and we are glad to have the delegation from the United States, from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and at Tufts University, and we're extremely glad that even during such a tough period in relations between the United States and Russia, we are open for the discussions, and we are sharing our views on this extremely crucial issues and points. Thank you, guys. And now I would like to give speech to Andras Bayak, the mediator of this event. And Andras, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and I also would like to welcome everybody on behalf of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs of the Higher School of Economics. It's a great honor to have such distinguished panelists and diverse participants today with us. And I also would like to thank our experts for joining us. We have two leading experts on Eurasian international relations in Eurasia and the US-Russia relations. And we're also delighted to have with us the Fletcher School, which is actually one of the best graduate school in the world in the sphere of international relations. And now I would like to extend my gratitude to Arik Burakovsky, who is the team leader of the Fletcher School delegation. And Arik, thank you for bringing the Fletcher School for the second time to the HSC, the Higher School of Economics. It's a great pleasure for us to have you. And today we are going to talk about and compare the Russian visions on the Eurasian integration model with its perception in the United States, as well as we are going to focus on the intersections of the Russian and the US strategy in the Eurasian region. Furthermore, we are planning to engage in identifying what are the challenges and the opportunities the Eurasian Economic Union faces today in the region, and what can be the compatibility, what opportunity can be for compatibility with the European Union and with the Silk Road economic belt. And I'm very happy to see that really we have participants from all over the world, from all of the Eurasian region. All right. So, as an outcome of our today's discussion, we are anticipating to facilitate a research group as well of the HSC and Fletcher students, so that they could work together toward a joint publication. And as far as I know, that the Fletcher School has several publication facilities. So we're going to have two parts. In our first part, I would like to ask our distinguished experts to give a short overview on the topic and remarks. Then we are going to the Q&A session. And you are going to have the opportunity to ask your questions both from the experts and from each other. So, now I would like to introduce to you our first speaker, Professor Maxim Braterski, a leading research fellow at the Center for Comprehensive and International Studies and the economic supervisor for the Master Program International Relations in Eurasia, which is a double-degree program with the University of London at the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs. He is a renowned author on Russia's political economy, and one of his latest books is Economic Instruments of Russian Foreign Policy. Professor Braterski will tell us about prospects for economic integration in Eurasia, highlighting Russia's and China's role in it. So please welcome Professor Braterski.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Actually, I don't have an intention to talk about China too much because it's not exactly my field of expertise, but I have some thoughts about the Eurasian Economic Union, and I will be very glad to share them with you. I don't know the answers to many questions, but I hope I will be able to offer you some lines for discussion, some angles for your own thinking. Just to remind you, Eurasian Economic Union is a project involving 5 countries at the moment, Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. This was and is not the first attempt to reintegrate part of the post-Soviet space economically. There were many attempts before that. All of them failed to this or that extent. The only project that was formally done before the Eurasian Economic Union and was successful was the creation of free trade zone in CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, which was announced and implemented about a year before the Eurasian Economic Union. And as you see, not all the post-Soviet countries participate there, and it is one of the big issues that probably will be the focus of your discussion. Does this project make any sense without participation of Ukraine? Because there were many hopes that Ukraine would participate, and economically Ukrainian participation was very important for the success of this project. But with your permission, I will return to the beginning and point at 2 things which I think are central to your possible discussion today. First, what is that? What Eurasian Economic Union is about. Is it economic really? Is it political really? Is it a mix? By the way, there is no simple answer to this because in parallel we can ask ourselves, and what is European Union? Is it political or economic project? Also a very difficult answer. The second question, which will certainly be the focus of your debate today, is whether it's successful or not, or let us put it this way, whether it has any chances for success or it has failed already, especially without the participation of Ukraine. Again, I don't know the answers to this, but I will offer some lines of thinking because our judgment of success or failure depends very much what questions do we ask and what do we take as success. And I'm very glad that our renowned economists are not with us today, because they view everything through the prism of money, profit, usefulness, and if there is more money, it's a success. If there is less money, it's a failure. They have very simple logic. Huh? Impressive. Yeah. No, they have their point. We won't argue with that. But this point is somewhat not very embracing, I would say, because my feeling is that the bunch of assumptions and theories, classical, neoclassical economists and high school of economics are neoclassical economists, mostly. The bunch of theories they apply is very dusted and not very modern anymore. Because what do they judge as a success? Whether trade is created or diverted. Yeah? If there is more trade, it's a success. No, they refer to David Ricardo and Adam Smith. Since then, they didn't read anything. If there is less trade or there is no additional trade, it's a failure. If we look at the situation in Eurasian economy from this point of view, we will not see any significant progress. There are different explanations of that. We may refer to the aftermath of the global economic crisis. We may refer to the so-called third stage of economic crisis that hurt the periphery, especially Russia, Kazakhstan, and etc. But I would point to the central reason. Trade, according to this classical European integration theories, etc., trade expands when tariffs are liberalized, when there is no import duties between the countries. But import duties had been removed before that. There were no import duties already when the Eurasian Economic Union was being founded. So there was nothing to reduce. That is why one could not expect fast increase of trade. Because there was no reason to. It had been liberalized before that in a framework of the free trade zone. Another thing economists are usually referring to when they talk about economic integration units, they talk about the economy of scale. They say the bigger markets, more opportunities for producers. Again, they have their point, but these markets were more or less in place already there, even before the establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union. And probably there is some additional value that is being produced right now because of these larger markets. But again, there was no revolution in there. So, but what I want to point out, I could give you some more reasons and some more lines for traditional economic thinking on issues like that. I think these explanations simply do not work in the modern world anymore. Regardless of Mr. Trump, there were quite serious ideas of Trans-Pacific Partnership. There were and still there are. They haven't been formally abandoned. The projects of transatlantic, this project, uniting or making closer the economies of Europe and the United States or Europe and Asian countries. And in all of them, the direct economic gain is not obvious. I've seen many papers and lots of research done in different economic centers in the United States and France and Britain. Nobody was very optimistic about the prospects of GDP of Europe and America growing, increasing rapidly because of this agreement. It is about other things. It is about norms, it is about institutions, it's about tariffs, it's about mutual penetration of corporations on the territory, of other nations. So probably we should judge the project of Eurasian Economic Union with these measures, not the measures of 1950s when we were talking about the liberalization of trade. It had been done already, so there is no win there. To what extent it's political? I remember many years ago, Mrs. Clinton referring to this project, saying that we see what is happening. It is Putin's attempt to re-Sovietize the post-Soviet space, and we see him through, and we won't allow him to do this. It is not serious either. If any of you is following more or less the development of relationship between Russia and Kazakhstan, Russia and Belarus, you will see that what is Soviet system? Soviet Union is hierarchy. It is when Moscow is central and everybody obeys. You simply cannot see this. This does not exist. It's very often when not Russia twists the arms of Belarus, but vice versa. It's Batьka Lukashenko who twists Russian arms. So there is no political hierarchy, and certainly it's not the development of a new imperialistic structure on the post-Soviet space. I wouldn't exclude that some people in the Russian leadership would want this, but it is not happening because others do not want that. So what is this? What is this? Is it economic or is it political? It is both, and I suggest that we should view and judge the success or failure of this project by other measurements, which mostly lie in a different sphere. It is not direct gains from the increase of trade or direct gains from the expansion of the markets, though there could be some. But it is rather the establishment of a separate economic center which would have a voice in the global organization of economy. It is means and ways to negotiate with other economic associations like European Union or something that will be born on the Pacific sooner or later. Because you cannot do it alone, you need to have a trade bloc behind you to do this. It is a question about tariffs. It is a question about certification. It is a question about rules of trade, which again you can promote only as a bloc, not as a separate country, even if you're a large country. And in that sense, the prospects of Eurasian Economic Union remain unclear. Non-participation of Ukraine in this project certainly undermined it, and economically and even politically it's much weaker than it was expected to be originally. I think there is more political element right now than economic, because on the way, because of the developments in the eastern part of Eurasia, the leadership of founding nations had to adjust their views to the new reality. We certainly don't know what will happen to this project with the departure of Mr. Nazarbayev, which will happen sooner or later. There are many ifs and there are many open questions, but I would probably insist on one thing. With a growing competition and with a growing mercantilistic approach, which is, I think, prevailing in the world right now, if you want to be something, if you want to stay something, you must be big. Yeah, and Eurasian Economic Union is a means to become big again. So thank you, that were my comments.
Thank you very much for your thought-provoking insight. And now I would like to handle the words to Professor Dmitry Suslov. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Dmitry Suslov, Deputy Director at the Center for Comprehensive and International Studies at the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs of the Higher School of Economics. And Professor Suslov is one of the most acclaimed Russian experts on the US-Russia relations. And he is the Russian coordinator and member of the working group on the future of US-Russia relations, which is a joint venture between the Higher School of Economics and Harvard University. Professor Suslov will tell us about the political prospects of the Eurasian Union and the US strategy in Eurasia from a Russian perspective.
Thank you.
Please welcome Professor Suslov.
Thank you very much, Andras. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be here. Yes, indeed, my major field of studies is the US-Russian relations, but I think everything is clear in the US-Russia relations for at least short and medium-term future, and this future is not really bright. I think we are doomed for the continuation of the new Cold War, of the confrontation, and the major task of US-Russian relations in the meantime is to prevent this confrontation escalating into a hot war, into a direct military clash with very dangerous consequences. This is why I will talk about different things, and let me start with an even more ambiguous and loose concept than the Eurasian Economic Union, because Eurasian Economic Union is more or less clear. It's a regional integration bloc, which has quite many similarities with the European Union, differences as well, but there are also huge similarities. Let me start talking about a much more vague but nevertheless very important issue for the world and for Russian foreign policy, which is Greater Eurasia, or a Greater Eurasian Partnership. And I think that will be one of the highlights of Russian foreign policy for the years to come. President Putin has already mentioned Greater Eurasian Partnership in his yesterday first foreign policy statement after the results of the election were published. And he mentioned that Greater Eurasia will remain one of the key priorities of Russian foreign policy. So what is Greater Eurasia? Is it serious? Is it not? Is it a fake? Or is it something in the making or has already emerged? And what role does the United States play in this process? Amazingly, of course, the United States so far plays a very positive role in the emergence of Greater Eurasia because it facilitates the process of its creation by pursuing a simultaneous policy of containing Russia and China together, in full contradiction to the fundamental foundations of the realist assumptions on the U.S. foreign policy. Now, I recall Henry Kissinger used to claim that a very important principle of the U.S. foreign policy should be to keep U.S.-Russia and U.S.-China relations better than the Russian-Chinese relations. Today it's absolutely diametrically opposite. So what is Greater Eurasia? I fundamentally agree with observation of Maxim Vladimirovich that we are lucky not to have economists here, because traditional economics is not helpful in understanding Greater Eurasia. It is not about the volumes of trade and investment. I mean, people who criticize the concept of Greater Eurasia, who talk that it is just, pure mystification produced by some Russian analysts and Putin, they show to the figures that Russian trade turnover with Europe, with the European Union, is far greater than its trade with China, whereas Chinese trade with the United States is simply uncomparable with the Chinese trade with Russia. Similar situation about investments, similar situation about the density of economic projects. However, I think Greater Eurasia is already being emerged, and in order to understand it and to perceive its emergence, we need to look on it not through an empirically economic perspective, but through an international relations perspective. And we need, I think, to use English school as a theoretical foundation for understanding Greater Eurasia, which talks about rules and communities. And for me, Greater Eurasia is then is international community. Not economic, not economically centric, but a comprehensive international regional community, which is based on the nature of relations. And the nature of relations within this region needs to have its peculiarities. And we do have this peculiarity. We have a unique culture of relations, a unique quality of relations in Greater Eurasia, first and foremost between Russia and China, which is a unique type of neighboring great power relationships. Right? Again, the classical viewpoint on IR would tell us that Russia and China are doomed for confrontation, right? And that Russia should be afraid of the Chinese rise. China should establish its hegemony in Central Asia at the expense of Russian interests. Eurasian Economic Union should be a plot to limit the Chinese influence, and so on and so forth. We see nothing like that. Right, and already now we have a unique quality. This is the unique example in the history of international relations where two neighboring great powers have positive sum, not zero sum relations, and do not perceive policies of each other as threatening the interests of the other. Right, so, and this is, I think, essential, right, for understanding Greater Eurasia, that we do have the new quality and new nature of international relations, interstate relations in this Eurasian region, with the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership as the foundation of it, but going beyond that, involving, of course, also the Central Asian countries, and so on and so forth. There are three major drivers behind the emergence, objective drivers behind the emergence of Greater Eurasia. First driver is Russia's pivot to the east, or rebalancing of Russian foreign policy towards the east, which started, by the way, before the current crisis in the Russian-West relations and in the US-Russia relations. It was first proclaimed by Vladimir Putin in 2012, so 2 years before the Euromaidan crisis. But major Russian experts started to speculate about that even before. And the major prerequisite behind that Russia's turn to the east is that the Pacific is becoming the centerpiece of global economy and world affairs, and in order for Russia to be at the center of global economic and political decision making, Russia to be there. Right? Whereas Russia's marginalization from the Pacific will really mean Russia's global marginalization. And Russia doesn't want to be globally marginalized, right? When Europe was the center of the world, Russia was part of the European board, right? So now Pacific is the center of the world, so Russia must be simply present and active there. So this is the first driver. The second driver is the Chinese turn, the intensification of the Chinese policy towards the West, towards Eurasia, which also has the objective foundation. China wants to accelerate its trade and logistics with the European Union. China does not want to be dependent on the marine trade, which can be easily blocked by the United States and other powers. So China wants the continental access to the European Union, and basically China is diversifying its foreign economic relations, its foreign policy, and so on and so forth. It has proclaimed economic dimension of the Belt Road, which later evolved into One Belt, One Road concept. It has the marine dimension and the continental dimension. So there is the profound intensification of China's outreach to the West. Geographical West, I mean, not political West, but geographical West, which for China is Central Asia and Russia. And the third driver behind the emergence of Greater Eurasia is that Eurasian Economic Union is a reality. By the way, I think one of the criteria of success of the Eurasian Economic Union is that it survived despite a rapid deterioration of the Russian-West relations. No one withdrew from Eurasian Economic Union after the new Cold War between Russia and the United States had started. On the contrary, some countries joined, like Armenia and Kyrgyzstan, and some other countries want to join, like Tajikistan, and some others are, comprehending and discussing the options to join this integrationist project. And there is a continuous integration of Eurasian Economic Union into the network of relations and structures in Asia, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, and so on and so forth, in the region, basically, right? There is the growing number of relations between Eurasian Economic Union as a bloc, as an integrationist arrangement with the third countries, including China, but not only China. Well, Vietnam was the first. Now a series of agreements between Eurasian Economic Union and other ASEAN countries are being discussed. An agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and ASEAN, bloc to bloc, is being discussed. There are very active negotiations between Eurasian Economic Union and China. Other Asian and Pacific countries, including Japan, South Korea, India, and so on, are considering also establishing formal relations with the Eurasian Economic Union. So there is this growing integration of the Eurasian Economic Union into the network of relations. Thus, as a result of the combination of these three major processes, we do have already a new quality of relations, a new density of political relations.
in Greater Eurasia, which basically constitutes Greater Eurasia as a reality which is in the process of emergence. Now, my second point will be that this emergence of Greater Eurasia is absolutely compatible and congruent with the global tendencies, which are regionalization taking the lead over globalization, and economic governance also moving to the regional and trans-regional levels from the global level. The global level of global governance now is being stagnant with the stagnation of WTO, with the unclear policies of the United States. You know, the United States is turning to the egoistic, mercantilist foreign policy. This is absolutely incompatible with the preservation of the current mechanisms of global economic governance. The US itself is not satisfied with the global rules that exist at the global level. I mean, the rules governing global economy. So the governance of economic relations is moving to the regional and trans-regional level. Maxim Vladimirovich mentioned TPP, TTIP, which might, re-emerge after Trump, hypothetically, although it will be very difficult to do it, given the protectionist mood now in the United States. But nevertheless, Greater Eurasia is part and parcel of this process. And finally, the policies of the United States accelerate the emergence of Greater Eurasia, provide a more vibrant dynamic to the emergence of this super region or the super regional international community by simultaneous containment of Russia and China and pushing Russia and China towards each other. One of the fundamental shifts of the US foreign policy under Trump administration was a very profound reshape of the US foreign policy vis-à-vis China, shrinking of the engagement component of the US policy towards China, and profound expansion of the containment component of the US policy vis-à-vis China. Russia and China are perceived as, both revisionist powers, as a so-called, so to say, authoritarian bloc of revisionist powers. And the United States is intensifying policy of containment of China and containment of Russia. As for the policy of containment of China, it is in the Pacific concept. Right, the US are creating Quad, intensifying its relations with India, and trying to establish Quad, the quadrennial partnership of the US, India, Japan, Australia, as the military component of the containment of China, and as the military political, foundation of the Indo-Pacific. And the US is already speculating about economic component of the containment of China policy, talking about a necessity to find alternative to One Belt, One Road. Alternative to One Belt, One Road, and claim that regional powers in South Asia, Southeast Asia should prefer other economic projects, not the One Belt, One Road, and participation in One Belt, One Road is kind of sacrifice of their sovereignty. Rex Tillerson was talking about that quite a lot. But he was fired. But the policy, I think, will continue. If China is being contained from the south, southeast, and from east, where will China go? Of course, it will intensify its policy vis-à-vis Russia. The same with the U.S. Intensification of the U.S. containment policy of Russia. So, since the time is up, let me draw this conclusion. The question is not whether Greater Eurasia will be a reality or not. But the question is whether the emergence of Greater Eurasia will contribute to the global division of the world and global polarization of the Pacific in particular and the world in general. Between Greater Eurasia on the one hand and Indo-Pacific on the other hand, with the reintroduction of the global Cold War And in our view, in my personal view, this is exactly what the United States wants right now, right? They work towards this greater polarization and fragmentation of the Pacific into these two adversarial competing blocs. Or the second alternative is that Greater Eurasia as the emerging reality, and Indo-Pacific as also the emerging reality, will be compatible, not divisive. And in the context of the US-Russian confrontation, which is reality on the ground and will be such for the observable future, the only way to ensure their compatibility and avoid a clear polarization of the Pacific is for Russia to intensify its relations with the countries like Japan, India, ASEAN countries, and so on, including the allies and partners of the United States, not at the expense of the Russian-Chinese partnership, but together with continuation and preservation of Russian-Chinese partnership. This is why I personally look forward to the further intensification of the Russian-Japanese relations, to the preservation of the Russia's relations partnership with India, and so on and so forth, right? And with this work, we will manage to overcome this divisive approach of perceiving Russian-Chinese partnership as something opposite to the Indo-Pacific, as something opposite to the liberal world order, which is fracturing by itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insightful and inspiring remarks and introduction. It's very interesting what our guests from the United States are going to tell about the U.S. foreign policy. How is the United States striving to tackle China and Russia at the same time? I think it's a big question, and I think that it's for the Russian participants, but whether they agree with the promising future for Russia in the Eurasian region and the prospects of a greater Eurasia. I think it's going to be interesting to discuss these questions as well. Now, some technical remarks. As for Professor Bратерский has to leave soon, now we would like to open the floor for the questions, and after some rounds of questions, we are going to continue with the U.S. parts of our speakers. So now, please start your questions. Please start addressing your questions to Professor Bратерский, then Professor Suslov. And when asking question, please introduce your name and the institution you are representing. So now, do you have? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Garcia. I'm a second-year Fletcher student, and thank you very much for hosting us. I really appreciate both of your remarks and your perspectives on the issue. Professor Suslov, you talk about the emerging reality of a greater Eurasia, and I'm curious to know who gets to define what Eurasian or what greater Eurasian means when considering what countries could and should be part of the Eurasian Economic Union. Thank you.
Well, I think Greater Eurasia is much broader than Eurasian Economic Union. Eurasian Economic Union is just one of the components of Greater Eurasia, and not necessarily a central one. Greater Eurasia, as I see it, and as we develop this topic together with our colleagues and persuade the Russian leadership, in our opinion, right? Greater Eurasia is a community, international community, defined by specific nature and specific quality of international relations at this particular region, which we already observe now. In terms of the borders of Greater Eurasia, they are undefined. well, some people perceive, for instance, Shanghai Cooperation Organization as an institutional framework for Greater Eurasia, but I think it's much broader than that, because not all the members, for instance, of the Eurasian Economic Union are members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, right? And vice versa. So I see Greater Eurasia in terms of the countries that participate in it and in terms of the projects as a spaghetti box, which consists of Russian-Chinese partnership, spaghetti box, you know, where everything is mixed, right? Russian-Chinese partnership, Eurasian Economic Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, elements of BRICS, absolutely. India is a very, I think, important question, whether India is a natural component of the Greater Eurasia today or not. On the one hand, India is the member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. On the other hand, India is clearly perceiving China as the strategic rival, and the competition and confrontation even between them is going up. And India has embraced and welcomes the Indo-Pacific concept, right? And of course is the, intensifying its relations with the United States and so on and so forth. So it's mixed. By the way, India is a key actor because India, and we need to preserve India in the Eurasian dialogue. And I think India will be there because it's very unlikely that India will become a second Japan. You know, it will not simply join the system of alliances and partnerships with the United States and sacrifice strategic independence of its foreign policy, right? So Indian participation in both projects can be viewed as a guarantor of their compatibility and as a factor against polarization of the Pacific into Indo-Pacific on the one hand and Greater Eurasia on the other hand. As for the prospects of the enlargement of the Eurasian Economic Union, I think Maxim Vladimirovich could talk about that. Talking about Ukraine, by the way, now I think the fact that Ukraine is not participating in the Eurasian Economic Union in the shape as we see Ukraine today is a factor of success of Eurasian Economic Union, not failure, because Ukraine will be certainly a liability for this project. Ukraine is purely non-integratable either with Eurasian Economic Union, with Russia, or with the European Union, by the way, because it is so divided internally. So I don't think that any prospects of Ukraine joining Eurasian Economic Union exist. At the same time, no prospect for Ukraine joining European Union exists either. I would guess that in the meantime, if the situation in Tajikistan becomes better, it will ultimately also depend on the state of Afghanistan, but I would be not surprised to see Tajikistan and Azerbaijan, by the way, also as members of Eurasian Economic Union, but not now in the longer term process. As for now, I do not see the prospects of immediate enlargement, but maybe Maxim Vladimirovich could disagree.
I don't think that there are any particular plans for enlargement either. Moreover, I'm not sure it is so necessary and useful. What is being done is Eurasian Economic Union is negotiating now free trade agreements with countries. There is one with Vietnam, with Iran I think will be signed shortly, with China should have been signed in January, but I haven't heard anything about that, whether they did it or not. With Pakistan, there are negotiations. With India, there are negotiations. With Malaysia, with quite a few ASEAN countries. So the idea is not to expand, I think. The idea is rather to create networks. When, by the way, this Greater Eurasia project is a typical networking thing. There will never be a center, either in Moscow or in Beijing or in Delhi. Yeah, it is a different construction based on mutual economic interest, on trade interest, on similar understanding of world politics, on some mutual interest in the world financial system, currency system. I wouldn't say that there is a very huge positive agenda there, but the relationship on the Pacific, I think, and in Greater Eurasia will be built simply on different principles, because we all got used to the Atlantic system, which we call the world order. And it's based on Western rationality, certain history, certain understanding of things. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's one particular model, and we might expect that there could be other models as well.
Yeah, thank you. Please let us know, Maxim, do you have time for one more question, or you?
Yeah, one more question. Sorry, but somebody is waiting for me. It's a very big friend of our department, Professor Richard Sakwa. He's a big expert in the Valdai Club, and I have to. He's waiting for me. Actually, I promised him to come.
Okay, please, last question to yeah.
Hello, my name is Ella, and I'm a first-year student at Fletcher. Thank you so much for hosting us. And I have a question. There was an issue happened last year between the Kazakhstani and the Kyrgyz border when the border was closed for, I believe, more than 1 week. Could you please explain why this happened and why Eurasian didn't help to solve this issue?
No, first, it helped, but secondly, Eurasian Economic Union doesn't have a security dimension at all. Regardless of what some people say, that was a security issue. If you think that border incident was the first one, it was not the first one. There are border incidents in Central Asia all the time. Moreover, even today, borders between some post-Soviet countries are full of landmines. And every year, dozens of people get blown on them. There are ethnic minorities issue, there are exclaves and enclaves, there are unclear borders which were left by international treaties of 1922 and 1957 by the Khrushchev reform. There are water problems, there are drug trafficking problems, there are many problems. And of course, proponents of the Eurasian Economic Union would like to see that omnipotent thing, omnipotent institution which can, with a magic wand, reduce all the problems to zero, but unfortunately they cannot. They cannot. And some problems will persist. Moreover, we didn't mention that, but with the new leadership, we cannot read yet the direction of the development of Uzbekistan, which is a key player in that area. We don't know what will happen. Looks like they are take a guidance towards modernity, but what is modernity in their understanding, we don't know. Yeah? So there are many questions, but you're right. These incidents happened, and I'm afraid they're not the last ones.
So I'm actually original from Kazakhstan, and but Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan usually have a very good relationship. But may I ask follow up then? So sanctions, they are affecting third member countries.
Yes.
Could you please elaborate on this question a little bit more? Because I think it's not fair for Kazakhstan, for my country, right, that it affects our economy. And then also, what if Belarus and Kazakhstan express interest for Ukraine to join and be a member? Because it's a regional union, right? And Kazakhstan and Belarus, they do partner with Ukraine. Thank you.
No, it's very simple and very difficult to answer your questions. Yes, Russia was taking decisions. Yes, Russia had informed its neighbors, allies, and friends, but as far as I understand, Putin hasn't asked for their approval of this. It was his decision, it was Kremlin's decision. And yes, you're right, third countries see some consequences of this Russian policy. They're not awful, but there are some unpleasant moments, I would agree with this. Yes, there were scandals, multiple scandals. I'm not sure about Russian, Kazakhstani ones, but with Belarus there are scandals all the time, because Russian authorities feel that either Belarus as a country or some people there are just utilizing in their narrow selfish interest the situation. From time to time we would see crawfish being imported from Belarus and oysters being imported from Belarus and other things which simply are not being not produced there. And if you ask me, I don't know the good solution for that. Yes, in this particular issue, Russian, let us say, reading of national interest doesn't completely match the Kazakh and the Belarusian reading of their national interest. And I think the only way it is what exactly has been done. On some moments they found a compromise. On some moments they did not find a compromise. On some things, to some things, Russia is simply not paying attention, pretending that nothing like that exists because it doesn't want to raise this issue. So it's a combination of all these three approaches. Yes, we would all love to live in a perfect world, but unfortunately we don't live in the perfect world. Yes, you're right. Yes, these problems do exist.
Professor Bратерский, we are very grateful that you joined us for today, and would like to ask just one minute, because our guests from the Fletcher School want to handle you some special present. So just I'd like to give the words to Ari to say thank you to.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for your insights and for this exchange. I have so many questions that I'd like to ask you, and I'm sure many of the students would too. So we regret that you can't stay longer, but on behalf of the Fletcher School and Chris Miller, who is the co-director of our Russia and Eurasia program, I'd like to present to you a book. It's called Putinomics. It's about the Russian economy over the last 17 years, and I hope that you will enjoy it. This book is also for Professor Suslov. It's The Struggle to Save the Soviet Economy, and I think you will enjoy it. And if you'd, when you're done, you can swap them. But
yeah, we will.
but they are recently written by Professor Miller, who will give his remarks very shortly. But thank you so much for hosting us. It's a real pleasure to be able to come here. Actually a second time now, and we really hope to continue to collaborate in the future. So thank you both.
Yep. Thank you very much, Ari. I want to excuse myself and to thank everybody for coming and allowing me to say something to the public. And now Dmitry will take over, and certainly will do his job very well.
Okay, let's continue. Now we are going to listen our guest experts' message. Unfortunately, our invited speakers from the Fletcher School, Professor Dresner and Professor Miller, have been forced to cancel their participation in the very last moment. So this afternoon we learned about this, and Chris Miller. Okay.
Maybe soon.
Yeah.
Excuse us, friends and colleagues. Unfortunately, due to the technical problems, we can't play this the comments of Professor Miller right now, but I think that we will deal with it, and during our conversation we'll solve the problem. Thank you.
All right. This is what is technical hurdles now. We are going on our Q&A session, and now I would like to encourage our Russian participants to ask questions as well. And I see we have the first participant. Please.
Thank you so much. My name is Natalia Askerova, and I'm a fourth-year student of the Higher School of Economics. And my question is to Dmitry Vячеславович. So you actually said that there are unclear borders of Greater Eurasia, which means that we are not actually certain what is the role of the European Union there, what is the role of European countries. And actually the European countries also have this concept of Greater Europe, which means that they want to create something from Lisbon to Vladivostok. So my question is, what is the connection between Greater Europe and Greater Eurasia, whether they can be complementary or they are opponents? What are your thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that with the conventional understanding of Greater Europe, which is the EU-centric international community also, and EU-centric integrationist zone, based entirely on the principles, rules, regulations of the European Union, and operating as concentric circles mechanism with the EU at the center and all the other players as the outer spheres of these concentric circles. I think those two ideas and concepts are clearly not compatible, right? Because Greater Eurasia will not basically be based on the European Union. It is absolutely clear that Russia will not become the associated, will not agree to association, to its own association with the European Union, as well as probably Belarus and the other countries of the Eurasian Economic Union now, and I'm not talking, of course, about China. So the original idea of Greater Europe as a indeed vast land from Lisbon to Vladivostok based on the EU rules and practices is basically dead. And the last bullet into this project was the Russian-Ukrainian conflict in 2014. This is why Europe and Germany are so angry with Russia. We basically destroyed their perception of wider Europe by these purposes. But in my understanding, this project was doomed from the very beginning because it was absolutely clear that Russia would not agree to participate in EU-centric structure, in EU-centric community, as an associated or not associated, but in any case, EU-centric country. And all the possible talks about Russia's return to EU-centricism in its foreign policy, which are now there are lots of speculations about that in Germany and in some other European countries, and even in some parts of the Russian elite. This is just nonsense. It's, it's unthinkable. So this is why, as far they are not compatible, and the European Union, I think, needs to fundamentally revise its strategy towards the East and towards Russia in general, reject the Eurocentrism of its policy towards Russia, and start developing relations with Russia and with Greater Eurasia on some more equal footing. Right, a prerequisite for that should be, of course, a mutual recognition between the European Union and Eurasian Economic Union, and basically that the European Union should reject this EU-centric approach. It will be difficult for the European Union to do so, especially with the current crisis that the European Union faces. But nevertheless, that's the only option. Otherwise, on the contrary, it's not that black and white, because at the same time, we do see a certain interest on the part of the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union to continue relations with the EU. If Eurasian Economic Union is perceived and develops as a rival project to the European Union, right, then it will not be successful, because the countries like Kazakhstan, for instance, they want to continue their relations with the EU. Armenia wants to continue their relations with the EU. So a dialogue between European Union and Eurasian Economic Union would be very helpful for that, to satisfy those countries and to reduce the verge which is being emerging at the borders of these two. But the wider Eurasia concept, the wider Eurasia community or greater Eurasia community, I think should be and already is open to participation of the countries of the European Union and the European Union as such, but not on the EU-centric conditions.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Or next, yeah, please.
My name is Melanie. I'm a Master of International Business student. And you mentioned that China wanted to broaden its land and infrastructure and land routes, economically speaking, and to compensate with the maritime one. And my question is the following. Most of the Eurasian Economic Union are actually landlocked countries. So in a way, their weakness is the strength that China is looking. So is there some room in that sense, in that perspective, for cooperation between China and some other East Asian countries with the EU?
Once again, can you repeat your last question?
Because those are landlocked countries, and China has maritime routes available, and they both have maybe some complementarity between their weaknesses and their strengths. So in that sense, in terms of infrastructure and route of commerce, could the EU find common grounds with China and negotiate to trade together and use those strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I do not see any contradiction here. As you mentioned, I perceive these processes as absolutely complementary. China wants to develop maritime trade and maritime infrastructure. This is the One Belt, One Road project is about. At the same time, China wants to be independent from the straits, and China wants also a land access to the European Union, and a huge infrastructure building in Central Asia, in East Europe, and in Russia helps Chinese economy, right? And the development of the economic dimension of the Silk Road is also contributing Chinese economic development. So I don't see any rivalry here. On the contrary, now we see that the marine component, maritime component of One Belt, One Road is being increasingly challenged by the United States, also by India and Japan, which pushes China even more to focus on the continental dimension and to develop the infrastructure with Central Asia, with China, with Russia, with East Europeans like Poland and so on and so forth. And I think this process will continue. By the way, let me mention also something that I skipped due to the time limitation. I think the emergence of Greater Eurasia is not just something objective, but also something necessary. In order to solve exactly China problem and China question in international relations. Because objectively, China is rising and is becoming one of the hegemonic powers in the world. It is reshaping the balance of power very quickly. And if China continues to rise as a unilateralist hegemonic power, it will inevitably get trapped into the Thucydides trap. right? It will inevitably force and push the other countries to unite against China and join into China containment policy. This is already what's going on in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. So Greater Eurasia is exactly from this perspective a necessary way to resolve the Chinese hegemonic question and the Chinese preponderance by diffusing China and fusing China into a system of rules, institutions, networks, and relationships in Greater Eurasia, and thus, make China's policy more multilateral, and thus resolves the issues. Greater Eurasia, for China, this is, of course, a very huge simplification, but nevertheless, I think there is some point here, and very important point here. Greater Eurasia for China is something what European Union is for Germany. European Union helped to resolve the problem of German preponderance in Europe because Germany diffused and integrated into the system of EU institutions does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Right? And yes, of course, Germany is a leader in the European Union, but nevertheless, right, there is no unification of others against Germany, which was exactly the case when the exercise of German power was unilateral and when Germany was explicitly trying to build German-centered system of relationships in Europe. Similar with China. And Greater Eurasia concept solves this issue. Right? Solves this issue, prevents Thucydides' trap vis-à-vis China, and integrates China, diffuses China into this network of relations. It will be very, of course, difficult for China to follow this logic because it contradicts the Chinese foreign policy traditions, which are the unilateralist hegemonic traditions of the Middle Kingdom under heaven. But nevertheless, we are very explicit nowadays to our Chinese friends, right, that the alternative to Greater Eurasia for them is that they will follow the path of Germany. And clearly they do not want to do it. So we hope that some more enlightened way of management of the Chinese question will be possible through Greater Eurasia.
Thank you very much. We are getting short of time, and now I think that we managed our technical problems. Now, please welcome the greetings from Professor Miller from the United States, from the Fletcher School. And are you going to present?
Sure. So I will introduce Professor Miller quickly, and I'm sorry that there were some technical difficulties, but as you know, there are currently many obstacles to U.S.-Russia relations, but I'm always optimistic and think that we can overcome. We've had problems with visas, we've had problems with just generally being able to connect over Skype and so on. And so I think that despite all of these troubles, we can find a way to work together. So I, as Andras mentioned, coordinate the Russia and Eurasia program, but unfortunately do not have very much expertise on the geoeconomics of Eurasia. Luckily for us, both of our co-directors, in fact, Professor Daniel Dresner and Professor Chris Miller, work on international political economy, and particularly in the Eurasia region. So Professor Chris Miller has asked me to present a video message on his behalf. He is an assistant professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Previously, he was at Yale University, and the two books that he's written I have just presented. So without further ado, let me play an audio message from Professor Chris Miller.
Hello everyone, this is Chris Miller. It's nice to be able to speak with you today. I regret that I wasn't able to be there in person to join this conversation, but I hope I can provide is going to be to describe the view of the U.S. government and the Washington policy community towards two different Eurasian economic integration efforts. The first would be the Eurasian Economic Union, and the second is China's Belt and Road Initiative. The first thing to keep in mind when looking at how Washington relates with both of these initiatives is that there's far more attention placed on the Belt and Road than there is on the Eurasian Economic Union, and there are several reasons for that. First is that Washington believes that China is much more of a significant long-term challenge to the United States than is Russia. Second, there are far more countries that are involved in some capacity in the Belt and Road than involved with the Eurasian Economic Union. And third, there is far more economic effect that's anticipated from the Belt and Road Initiative than from the Eurasian Economic Union. But there are some similarities with which how Washington addresses these organizations, and the biggest similarity is that there's disagreement to what extent they should be treated as political organizations or economic organizations. And the answer is obviously they're a bit of both, but where you stand on that divide in Washington to a significant extent shapes the way that you respond to both of these initiatives. So first, looking at how Washington has addressed the Belt and Road Initiative over the past several years since it was launched, the biggest question in Washington, and this is a question not only that U.S. policymakers face, but policymakers from many other countries as well, is what does the Belt and Road actually mean? If you look at how Chinese rhetoric about the Belt and Road has evolved over time, it's transitioned from being just an initiative focused on improving infrastructure in Central Asia and other regions that border China to today it's an initiative that spreads all across the world to the Balkans, to the Black Sea. Even South American countries now speak about integrating with Belt and Road Initiative. So there's real confusion as to what the Belt and Road actually is, and some skepticism that, in fact, it means nearly as much as Chinese policymakers say that it means. And the skepticism about the substance behind the Belt and Road was, I think, only increased after the most recent changes to the Chinese constitution, where the Belt and Road is actually put in the Chinese constitution next to Xi Jinping thought. And so there is, I think, some growing sense of belief in Washington that, in fact, the Belt and Road is much more of a propaganda tool for internal purposes as much as external purposes, rather than a real substantive initiative. Now, that said, there is no doubt that although there's no institution that lies behind the Belt and Road, unlike the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is institutionalized, it has a headquarters, it has a full-time staff. The Belt and Road has none of that, but it certainly does have a fair amount of money behind it from a variety of different Chinese institutions, some directly backed by the state, others backed by state-owned banks. There's also no doubt that Chinese corporations are being pressured from the government to invest in projects that are somehow connected to the Belt and Road. So there's clearly a lot of money flowing into projects that have the phrase Belt and Road associated with them. But there's still debate in Washington as to, even though this is kind of an amorphous project, even though it's not exactly clear the different drivers of Belt and Road investments in Beijing and among Chinese companies, there's still a sense that this is important, but there's a debate as to what way it is important. Is it important primarily because it's going to reshape Eurasian economies by building roads and bridges and trains across Eurasia, or is it going to reshape Eurasia because it's going to drastically increase Chinese political influence by both letting the Chinese use economics as a tool of gaining political control, and also by making other countries more dependent on Chinese investment in the future? And as I mentioned before, the answer is certainly a bit of both. Certainly, if the Chinese do indeed carry through all these investment plans, for example, building a new railroad program to Laos, which is going to radically transform that country's economic connections with China. Certainly, if the Chinese continue to pour money into infrastructure and power generation in Pakistan, that will certainly strengthen Chinese political influence in Pakistan. So on both the economic and the political fronts, there's no doubt that the Belt and Road will have some effect. But the question is, which will it be more significant for, the economic sphere or the political sphere? And in Washington, that debate is still very much open. But the people who are more concerned about the political effects of the Belt and Road are much more likely to take a stand against it. Whereas those who see the Belt and Road primarily as an economic venture are much more interested in potentially cooperating with it or trying to co-opt the Belt and Road so that it fits with existing international investment initiatives. There's a similar divide in Washington about understanding the Eurasian Economic Union, but there's much less optimism, I think, that the Eurasian Economic Union will in fact have a long-term, durable economic effect beyond perhaps the specific bilateral relationship between Belarus and Russia and Kazakhstan. For one thing, there are not nearly as many countries who will be involved in the Eurasian Economic Union compared to those that are involved in the Belt and Road. So perhaps the Eurasian Economic Union might expand to add Tajikistan, but the number of countries that could feasibly be added to the Eurasian Economic Union is quite limited. So there's no chance of kind of a world transforming shift along the lines of what the Chinese sometimes say about the Belt and Road. And the second thing that I think many people in Washington see as a limit on the economic effects of the Eurasian Economic Union is that, in fact, a lot of the economic integration initiatives have slowed, if not completely stalled, in part because getting agreement between Belarus and Kazakhstan and Armenia and Russia on some of the more intrusive regulatory questions which are necessary to bring down trade barriers between the countries is actually quite challenging, because each of these countries have their own domestic politics, their own domestic lobby groups, and just as trade deals are hard in the United States, they're hard in the European Union, so too getting Kazakhstan and Russia and Armenia to agree on domestic regulatory issues is in fact quite challenging, which is why you've seen the pace of integration, I think by most metrics, slowing over the past year or two. And that's why most people in Washington tend to see the Eurasian Economic Union largely through the political lens, not exclusively, but largely, in part because it does seem that it's facing real challenges in deepening integration beyond what the current status quo already is. And there's an interesting, I think, similarity between the debate in Washington about interpreting the Eurasian Economic Union and the debate in Moscow, where in Moscow as well, so far as I understand it, there's also a bifurcation between those who see the Eurasian Economic Union's significance primarily in a geopolitical sense, strengthening Russia's connections with its neighbors, and those who see it at least as significant in the economic sphere by deepening economic ties between Russia and its neighbors and making trade easier for businesses in Russia and across Eurasia. And so that, I think, is an open question for the future of the Eurasian Economic Union, is will it be able to deepen trade links between Russia and its neighbors, between the member states, or will, in fact, that integration stop at its current level, which is somewhat integrated, but not nearly as integrated as, say, the countries of the European Union. And if that's the case, if integration stops, then it will become more difficult, both in Washington and in other countries around the world, to see the Eurasian Economic Union primarily through an economic lens. And I think the political lens will come to the fore in how policymakers look at this organization. So I wish you a very productive discussion. I hope these comments were helpful in understanding some of Washington's views of the issues. And I hope you have a useful conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Rick, that you made it possible regardless the snowstorm in Boston and the U.S. sanctions to Russia, against Russia. So now I think that we have learned that all of our three speakers agreed on that the political dimension of the Eurasian Economic Union prevails, but we are here in the higher school of economics, so we cannot go without discussing the economic part. And so now we have the pleasure to introduce one of our PhD students who is going to tell a few words about the economic part of the union. So please welcome.
I would like to introduce to you one of our younger experts, Yuri Koffner, the head of the Center for Eurasian Studies here at HC, and the research fellow of International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Vienna. So here, Yuri, today here with us via Skype. Yuri, do you hear us?
Yes, I hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yuri, we're glad to have you all today and listen you attentively. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for this great opportunity and invitation. I was told to make it short, so I'll really try, and I will have just some bullet points. Just one short correction. It's not the Center for Eurasian Studies. It was it before that. That's fine, Ovanes, that's fine. It's the Eurasian sector of the Center for Complex European International Studies of the Higher School of Economics. It's really difficult, and only a lot of experience can make you make it right. So it's okay, it's fine. So I have 4 short bullet points about the Eurasian Economic Union, especially for our American friends. I think which should be noted that there are 2, as it was already said by Dr. Resner, views on the Eurasian project. One, it can be seen as something, well, basically, what is most important. The Eurasian Economic Union is not about ideology. It's not about cultural integration, socio-humanitarian integration. It's especially not. It doesn't have any security aspects to it. So it's only the idea behind Eurasian economic integration is pragmatic Eurasianism proposed by Nursultan Nazarbayev, the president of Kazakhstan, and not by the Russian side. It's only about economic integration, economic interests, mutual benefits. That's the first point I would like to make. This is the official idea. Of course, there might be some other experts or people who would like something more than that, me included. However, that is not the case officially in concerning the union. Second bullet point is about we have talking about the problems, the challenge of further economic integration within the union. We have the problem of that we don't have enough competencies of the supranational bodies. So the first thing is that if you look into the union policies, the Eurasian Economic Commission has only 2 significant competencies, which is in trade policy and so tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. All other questions are not really the competency of a supranational institution of the Eurasian Economic Commission. There still there has to be intergovernmental discussions and negotiations on that. And now there are discussions ongoing to give the Eurasian Economic Commission more competence in this sphere. However, how far and how soon this will happen, we are not sure yet. Also, similar with the Eurasian Court, the Court of the Eurasian Economic Commission, which is based in Minsk, it doesn't have the possibilities actually to have any rulings within the Eurasian Union as similar as the European Court has. So this is one of the problems, one of the challenges of further integration. Then the third bullet point I would like to make is on the economic policies. And what, to my opinion, will be a big question in the future of further real integration, first of all, will be that we have to understand that 70 to 80% of the economies of the post-Soviet states and all of the 5 member states of the Union, 70 to 80% is made up by state procurement of those economies. So if we want to have further integration, liberalization within the Union, free movement of goods, labor, and so on, we need to find a system which will allow every of the member states to take part in the state procurement, especially, of course, in the state procurement of the Russian Federation, the largest market by far within the Union. And the other big question concerning future economic policies, both internal and in relation to third parties, such as already mentioned China, India, Iran, and so on, is what will be the future economic policy be of Russia, of the new Putin era for the next 6 years? Will it be continued import substitution, or will it be more liberalization? Because this actually, import substitution is related to state procurement. Will we find a mechanism that will allow our member states to participate in this? Or will it be liberalization, which will be also a more effective method of having cooperation with with third countries? That is the big question, and that is the big divide, let's say, between Kudrin and Titov, the liberal economic school, and the Derzhavny, or state economic school, which are now like fighting each other in Russia in a not literal sense, of course. And the last point I would like to make is on this Greater Eurasian concept. So I wanted to concentrate more on Greater Eurasia, but I see there have been questions about this concept of a common economic space from Lisbon to Vladivostok. So I would like to make only 2 short arguments about this. First of all, there is strong research going on, especially at our institute in Vienna, where we research the possibilities and challenges of a common economic space. And there is strong interest, especially from the French, European, German, and Italian business community in this project. And what are the interests of both sides? The interest of the European side is, of course, to get access to the Eurasian market. to get an equal treatment of the European companies to increase exports to the Eurasian market, 180 million people buying European goods, that would be something great. And of course, energy stability, supply stability. The other side, the Eurasian side, our side, what are our interests in a common economic space? First of all, it would be to get technologies from Europe and to get investments. And of course, due to the sanctions and political problems, which I won't go into, now we see a steady increase of investments coming from the Asian market and a steady increase of the trade turnover with the Asian region. And the second point in this concern, in this relation, I would like to make is if we would come, let's say within 10 years, to a negotiation between the European Union, I'm finalizing now, Venice, and a Eurasian Economic Union, what could it look like? And basically, if we talk about a Lisbon-Vladivostok concept, a common economic space, no one really knows what it means. It's just a fancy name. Actually, we know what it means. It could be either of both. It could be either a non-preferential trade and economic cooperation agreement, as we are now going to have with China, Eurasian Economic Union and China, or it is going to be a asymmetric free trade agreement, as we have, for example, between the Ukraine and the European Union, so that the European Union will scrap all its tariffs at once, and the Eurasian Economic Union will scrap tariffs like concerning different sectors, where we will scrap some tariffs right now, others in 3 to 5 years, and then again to 10 years and so on. So this could be a possibility. The technical basis is given for a common economic space, but I think that is enough time for now I have. So if there are any more questions in the future, I'd be happy to continue this talks. Thank you very much.
Yuri, thank you for your statements, short and very bright. And dear colleagues, do you have any questions to the speaker? Would you like to ask any questions? Please, you're welcome. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. I have a follow-up question. You mentioned President Nazarbayev expressing interest in creating a union. I believe his speech was in 1994 when he said that we should create a platform where all the CIS countries joining that platform, right? Then the previous speaker said that Ukraine is a success that is not a member of the Eurasian Union. I'm sorry, European Union is in my mind. That's why I'm saying Eurasian Union. So could you please...
Even Russian policymakers make that mistake, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, so could you please elaborate on that? Why only 5 CIS countries are currently, if Nazarbayev expressed having a union with all CIS countries? And also when you say freedom, to have freedom of movements, my previous question was about the border closure between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. And actually, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan have a very, very good relationship. And this issue was first time ever in history, I believe, when the border was closed for so long, like 1 week. And if we talk about free movement of goods of goods, why the issue with border was not resolved quickly? Thank you.
Okay, those are actually 2 questions, but if we have a minute, I'll try to answer both of them. So first of all, why are not all CIS countries members of the Eurasian Economic Union? That was the first question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think part of it is the European neighborhood policy, where the European Union also gives financial aid to the countries which would like to become member states of the European Union. Which the Eurasian Economic Union basically doesn't really do. Well, we have a similar practice with the exactly the Kazakh Kyrgyz fund and the Russian Kyrgyz fund. However, it's not that attractive yet. I think it's a matter of attractiveness. It's a matter of competition to the European Union. And it's also, I think that the members, the other CIS countries are looking into how the Eurasian Economic Union will work out. So we have it for 3 years now. And I think also within the Union and outside of the Union, a lot of countries are looking at this and say, okay, let's figure out how it's going to work out in the next 10 years. and then we'll decide if we want to become members or not. I think that's the question. You can't compare it in this sense to European Union, 60 years of integration. And the second question concerning Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. Well, this is a bigger problem. It's obviously not an economic problem. It's a political problem of the elite which came into power after the fall of the Soviet Union. And this elite was brought up in this idea of creating power, let's say, principalities for their own, making their own countries mostly sovereign, as being not part of the Russian sphere. However, that doesn't, to my sense, that's a big problem, that they don't mind being part of the European sphere or the American sphere or the Chinese sphere, but only not the Russian, which I think is strange. However, my point being is that what we need now for the Eurasian Economic Union to work in the next, let's say, 30, 40 years, we need a new youth, a new class of specialists who will become the future Eurasia bureaucrats. As we have the European Union, European bureaucrats, which were created within the universities of Europe with this European idea of a common European future. We need such a youth of technocrats, of specialists, who are moderate patriots of the common union, of this common union idea. And if we will have this youth in the power within the next 20, 30 years, then I think we won't have those political problems.
Thank you, Yuri. And one more question.
Okay, thank you, Yuri, for being with us through Skype. And we have lots of participants who couldn't attend today's event, so that they are viewing us through our webcasting. And on their behalf, I would like to ask last questions about the economic part of the Union. What do you think about the custom reforms or the taxation part of the economic policy of the Union? Is there a provision to reduce administrative barriers and bring transparency by introducing electronic or digital custom controls? What do you think about it?
Well, actually, it's already being enacted. We have the new customs code, which came into force 1st of January 2018, which introduces a lot of very fancy modern instruments from all over the world, including one window policy, including electronic electronic supervising of imports and exports, economic agents which are accredited, more liberalization. So this is going on. This is my answer to your question concerning the customs procedures, which are really being liberalized and made more easy for the business community. And secondly, what I think also is good in the Eurasian economic integration process in general is that if you have, I would really advise you to go to the Eurasian Economic Commission. I'm sure they'd be happy to meet you and show you around. And it's a modern office building. You don't have anything like in this old Soviet big Moscow foreign ministry aura. They're very modern people in a certain sense, and they are always looking into the best practices all around the world, the most modern, the most efficient. And this is also part now of the modernization, digitalization agenda of the Eurasian Economic Union. And we now have a minister for digitalization, Kareni Minasyan from Armenia, whose task is to bring those liberalization and digitalization instruments into the integration policy.
Okay, thank you very much once again. Now we are really short on time, and now we would like to conclude our discussions with some final questions between the participants. So now I encourage a dialogue between our Russian participants and US participants, and I think that we have lots of interesting questions and hot topics to discuss. And now we'd like to give the words to Ones, and
yes,
let's start the discussion.
Thank you once again, Yuri. It was very bright and precise. And I remind you, dear colleagues, that Yuri now is in Vienna, where he's a research fellow and continuing his research. Thank you so much, Yuri.
Best wishes.
Goodbye. And yes, and now we're moving to our second big part, and we will be glad to hear the statements and your thesis on these ongoing topics, and we will be glad to hear the prospects from the US side. You're welcome, guys. Thank you.
go ahead. Eric, did you have the question?
So questions or comments, I think, are welcomed. Please.
Yes, please.
My question actually goes to Professor Dimitri, and I actually wanted to ask the person on Skype too. I want to ask about what would be your reaction, or how would you address this statement technically? For instance, China and Russia seem to have total control over Greater Eurasia, and in this case, China and Russia is engaged in, let me say, a marriage in which China seems to have an upper hand, or China is the man in the marriage. And I think that at the end, China's One Belt, One Road initiative, Belt and Road, will transcend through Eurasia, and through that, the EU may outlive its relevance, and also the fact that the OBOR might end up just exporting Chinese overcapacity and probably promoting the internationalization of the RMB and other stuff. So at the end, we may not end up having any Eurasia, Greater Eurasia, but rather the One Belt, One Road. How would you react to such a statement?
Thank you very much. First, I would disagree that Russia and China have a total control over the Greater Eurasia, because in the current interconnected world, no one has a total control over anything. Even the United States do not have a total control over their domestic politics and their electoral process, as we observed very clearly in the last election. So it's impossible to isolate Greater Eurasia from the influences of other players, of other countries and centers of power, including the United States and European Union, Japan and others. Moreover, it is fundamentally against the Russian interests to lock Eurasia, Greater Eurasia, as something between Russia and China, because that will be the prerequisite for failure. The regional countries, Central Asians, they do not want to be locked, right, with Russia and China only. Maxim mentioned Uzbekistan, which wants to modernize, and for Uzbekistan, clearly the path to modernization runs through Washington and through, the global economy as such, not just through the regional powers. So Greater Eurasia is again a community, not even a space or a block, not as a closed block, and we would resist any attempts from the outside to depict us as closed block. Secondly, I don't really agree that China is clearly a master and a superior partner in this Greater Eurasia project. First of all, Greater Eurasia is a joint project, right? Pay attention. Neither China participates in Eurasian Economic Union, nor Russia participates in One Belt, One Road. What is the format of Russian attitude towards One Belt, One Road? It's not participation, right? It's a joint development of Greater Eurasia with One Belt, One Road and Eurasian Economic Union. The term, which in Russian sounds like сопряжение, absolutely impossible to translate it into English, right? Сопряжение is something like compatibility and coordinated development, right? So we construct Greater Eurasia together without us participating into the Chinese project. And Putin did not participate and never participates in One Belt, One Road summits together with Xi Jinping on par with other participants of One Belt, One Road, right? And there is one similar thing between Russia and the United States. We can never join others' projects. Never. Right? The US either isolates itself or runs the projects of its own, right? Well, Russia also. Well, the difference is that Russia can allow a co-building of joint projects with others like China on par, on equal footing, right? But I would never see, I hope at least, Russia joining projects of the others. This is the reason why Russia refused to participate in, for instance, neighborhood policy of the European Union, right? On the contrary, Russia insisted on building what was called common spaces together with the European Union, you know, since 2003, and then the roadmaps of these common spaces since 2005. So we are able, and we do agree to construct joint projects with others, but we never participate in the others' projects as just one of the participants. That's the mantra, you know, that's the constant of Russian foreign policy, which I do not assume to change in the observable future. As for Chinese superiority, in the economic sense, yes. I mean, China is more, economically vibrant and successful than Russia. But from the military perspective, I don't think so, right? And in the military field, Russia has a vast military preponderance above China, both in nuclear. In nuclear, this is just beyond discussion, but also in conventional field. And the latest presidential address by Vladimir Putin, his statements to the speech to the Federal Assembly on March 1st, you know, when he boasted with these rockets and so on and so forth, was a message to China as it was a message to the United States. And, you know, it kind of destroyed, eliminated any discourse of the Chinese military superiority over Russia. This is first thing. Second thing, already, as I said, if China continues a policy of hegemonic behavior, unilateralist hegemonic behavior, if China develops unilateralist relations with Central Asian countries, including with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and so on and so forth, and will refuse to get integrated and diffused into the system of rules and institutions, including the Eurasian Economic Union, it will face resistance. It will face a backlash. I think Chinese will be smart enough to avoid this scenario because they value their relations with Russia, and that in Eurasia they do not have a hostile environment. Because they do have hostile environments on all other angles. They do have hostile environment and containment from the south, from the east, and from the southeast. Right? If Russia joins the containment China policy, China will be completely surrounded and isolated. Today, Russia is not just the only friendly, truly friendly neighbor vis-à-vis China, because all the other neighbors are afraid of China and quite concerned of China, including North Korea, by the way. Right? But Russia is the only great power in the world, the only great power in the world which is truly friendly with China. And this situation adds confidence to Russia. So for the observable future, I'm absolutely safe for the Russian-Chinese relations. I would not have been saved if, for instance, hypothetically, China and the United States create some kind of global condominium, some kind of G2, about which Zbigniew Brzezinski and some other speculated much. Right? Because in this case, yes, indeed, Russia would be encapsulated and troubled. But on the contrary, the US is conducting the policy of containment of China, right? And in this context, Russia will be safe of the prospects of its relations with China and the Chinese role in Central Asia.
I have I read a report from the Valdai Discussion Club in 2016, and also I think in May 2015, after the establishment of the EAEU, there was an agreement between them and Beijing about how to synchronize both projects, and so I think there are closer ties when it comes to the EAEU and the One Belt One Road initiative, and that is what I am saying, that I think that as a prediction, the OBOR might end up consuming the greater Eurasia at the end.
But the Eurasian Economic Union will not vanish in One Belt, One Road, right? And they are very different projects. I think the idea of compatibility was a great idea because Eurasian Economic Union emerged as the reality, and the economic belt of the Silk Road, at that time it was called like that, right? The Chinese project was also the emerging reality, and we had a choice how to regard that. right? And we could regard in a positive way, in a neutral way, or in a negative way. We decided to regard in a positive way, and thus avoided geopolitical confrontation in Eurasia, and transformed our relations, stabilized our relations as positive-sum relations, not zero-sum relations. As for why there is no abundance of successful manifestations of the continuation of that, right? This is a truly true question, and yes, as for now, there is a certain stagnation in terms of the further development of the compatibility between Eurasian Economic Union and China and One Belt, One Road. But these are, well, there are lots of explanations to that. Partly because of the inertia of Russian foreign policy elites, which are obsessed with their relations with the United States and with the West, largely, because we do not have a culture of interacting with China in the business sphere, right? I know I'm not an expert in this field, but I mean my colleagues tell me that it is absolutely different when to borrow from the European Western financial markets and from China and from the Asian financial markets. Yes, there were expectations in Russia that now China will pour billions of dollars on us and ensure our prosperity and development. This has not happened, and by the way, thanks God that it did not happen, because it would have increased our dependency on China. It's something that we need to avoid, right? But I would disagree that there is absolutely no progress. The agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and China is being developed, and what is essentially, in terms of ensuring this compatibility, is for the Eurasian Economic Union to have common intergovernmental policy vis-à-vis China. Right? We need to avoid China unilateral talks with Russia, with Kazakhstan, with Kyrgyzstan and others. We need to have a common policy of the Eurasian Economic Union. This is why we need to strengthen the instruments of intergovernmental cooperation. And Russia is pushing that process, right? That before our dialogue with China, we need to meet as five. We need to elaborate a common position, and then we need to transfer, to put this common position in front of China instead of unilateral negotiations. Unilateral negotiations with China will ultimately lead us to the Thucydides trap. Well, will lead China to the Thucydides trap and will destroy Greater Eurasia. So, whether China will be eager to join and to participate in this multilateral fora, it's still to be known in the future. There are no guarantees, right? I said Greater Eurasia has already emerged. It's being emerging, right? But it can collapse, of course, right? It can collapse, of course, in the future if China fails to multilateralize its foreign policy in Greater Eurasia and fails to take Eurasian Economic Union seriously.
Right. Now we are short of time, so we have time just for two last questions. But before we start those two questions, I would like to pop up a question, a general question to our US delegation, because it's a follow-up question to Professor Suslov's remarks, which were really interesting, and we'd really like to learn about the Americans' perspective as well. So now the following question is to the Fletcher delegation. What do you think about this containment policy? So what do you think about the U.S. foreign policy to contain Russia and China? How is it possible at the same time? What do you think about this? So please share some of your ideas and remarks on it.
And in this way, we are also interested not just in direct U.S. policy towards Russia or China, but in general about the Indian and Pacific region policy of the United States.
Well, I think it's an interesting framing of the question containing Russia and China. The term containment was historically used in the Cold War after George Kennan's famous telegram, and the idea was to contain the spread of communism. It was an ideological competition, and the Cold War had a system and a certain set of rules, and so the idea of containment made a great deal of sense. I'm not entirely sure that what the U.S. is currently trying to achieve is in fact the containment of Russia and China. I think it's a management of these relationships. I think that the world is largely unipolar at the moment, and I know that this is a controversial question in Russia as well, whether it's unipolar or, say, multipolar. The Russians, I know, don't like the idea of the world being bipolar, because that would mean it's just the U.S. and China, and Russia would be left out. So let it be unipolar for the sake of the Americans. But in terms of the way that we manage relations with Russia and China, I think that in many cases, as Professor Miller pointed out, there is the political versus the economic dimension, and Americans don't like this when I criticize U.S. foreign policy, but sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, because we may be fairly eager to engage in terms of our economic relations with these countries. Particularly China, Russia, we have far less trade with. But in terms of the political dimension, then we take a much different track. I would like to hear perhaps what some of the students think about this question. Is the United States in any way trying to contain, or what define our relations with these two countries in terms of a triangle? I think that in terms of our trip here and learning about U.S.-Russia relations, there is this very big question: how does China play into the big picture? If we're trying to seek avenues for the United States and Russia to cooperate, where are perhaps the areas that China can fit in? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Maria Elias. I'm a second-year Fletcher student. Thank you again for hosting us, especially this late in the evening. We really appreciate it. My 2 cents after just kind of hearing your commentary, Dr. Suslov, and just all the great questions everyone has posed, is that I'm not sure. It's easy to talk about these pacts and blocks in purely either economical or political terms. And a couple times the question of security came up, and I'm just not sure that in today's world we can separate the economic from the security. And I say that because as someone who is a international security studies and an international business relations major or field, we know that when a country or a group of people are impoverished or there's economic stress, that can lead to things like radicalization. And in the age where we live in, non-actors and terrorism, that can be one of the root causes of what leads to that. So when we talk about open borders and free trade, or greater economic prosperity, we do have to consider the threats from both cyber attacks, from terrorist attacks, and so I'm curious to what extent the U.S. Or just even the Eurasian Economic Pact takes that into account, because as the world gets more globalized, the regions get more intensified, if that makes sense. So I guess it was a question, but also just things going through my head.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and we can't pretend that
return of great power confrontation encapsulates us from the forces of globalization, right? The world remains interconnected, globally interdependent, and we are vulnerable. We are all vulnerable on all. The global governance, the necessity of global governance persists. The other thing is that the patterns of global governance differ a little bit from, they transform a little bit, and the regional and trans-regional dimension of global governance is strengthening, whereas the global dimension of global governance, well, preserves, because we do still have the UN, you know, Bretton Woods institutions and the G20 and G7, but the ratio between the regional, trans-regional level of governance and the global level of governance differs, right? The regional dimension is becoming, well, more important, at least in some issues, such as trade, investment, and so on and so forth, and Eurasian Economic Union just fits into this pattern. But having said that, I think we need to preserve our dialogue with the United States on managing global issues. And this is, well, my particular fear is that we don't, unfortunately. We don't have serious talks about cyber issues, which I understand the reasons why thus far the United States is not eager to talk to Russians seriously about cyber. But this is a very dangerous path, because today cyber is a field of war. And cyber weapons are a weapon of mass destruction, strategic weapon, no less than nuclear weapon, right? And you know, given the nature of U.S.-Russian relations now, it is absolutely irresponsible not to have the dialogue on cyber. I mean, climate change, I think, is a very important global factor, and so on. So. The point is how to combine the strengthening of confrontation between the United States and Russia, and the United States and China, with preservation of dialogue on global issues. So far, we do not see, we see that it is not easy to combine them, right? And the Russian-American dialogue on the global issues has degraded much, unfortunately. We still have some sporadic interaction on international terrorism, but it's it's greatly insufficient. We need to reconstruct that. As for whether it is containment or not, I would disagree. We perceive it as a containment strategy, as a reversal, as a comeback of containment policy on the part of the United States, because what is it if not containment when the United States are claiming that Russia and China are, you know, global malevolent actors, which try to destroy international order, and they need to be prevented from international order, when the role that Russia and China play in any region of the world, be it Latin America or Africa or Middle East, is depicted as essentially negative. If countries, the third countries, again in Latin America, Africa, and Middle East, are openly, you know, pushed to choose whether they are with the United States and the liberal order, or they are with Russia and China, but if they are with Russia and China, then they need to understand that they sacrifice their sovereignty, right? And they participate in the destruction of this liberal international order. I mean, the US is clearly, I mean, and openly talking about creating economic alternative to One Belt, One Road. And the security architecture in the Pacific that would prevent China from destroying the Pacific order, you know, and prevent China from building hegemonic structure, hegemonic order in the Pacific. And this is why Quad is natural, the US-Indian partnership is necessary, and so on and so forth. I mean, for us, this is containment. Right, this is containment. Right, containment is when you push it is not necessarily roll back so far. Right, but it is containment. Similar with the U.S. policy and NATO policy in Europe. right? If NATO is strengthening the eastern flank and basically is openly claiming that now NATO is back into containment policy, right? If NATO is claiming and the US is claiming that the purpose of their policy is to prevent Russia from, continuing its aggressive behavior vis-à-vis the Europeans, and if not sanctions, if not strengthening of the eastern flank of NATO, if not German and British troops in Baltic states and American troops in Poland, then Russia would already have attacked Poland and the Baltic states and so on and so forth. I mean, that's containment. Maybe this containment is a little bit softer than in 1983. Right, when we had nuclear crisis. But believe me, I mean, we can easily move, unfortunately, if we still don't have, if we do not re-establish our dialogue on strategic issues, including cyber, we can easily move to the new nuclear crisis, and basically military crisis between Russia and the United States. And the latest nuclear posture review published by the Trump administration is not really promising in this regard.
Great. We have for the last question.
I just want to, I guess, offer a bit of a response and thoughts from you. I'm Greg Osteria, obviously Fletcher student.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Thank you very much. And now we're really very happy that both the questions and the answers seem to be endless. We wish to have the opportunity to continue this discussion. Maybe next time, Arik is taking the guys next time. So we are happy to, we are looking forward to the next meeting. But today we have time limitations. And this time limitations is actually that the garderobe is closing at 9 o'clock. So those guys, just keep calm, okay? We have the...
We'll make it.
Okay. Anyway, it's time to thank you for your participation. And I'd like to expand our, on behalf of the faculty for World Economy and International Affairs, I'd like to extend our gratitude to Professor Suslov and our experts who participated online and through video and through Skype as well. And to you, that it was really a pleasure to have you here. And also I would like to extend our gratitude to the Student Center, the initiative for student, to the Center for Student Initiatives, who made this event possible. Personally, Ovanes Agopov made a tremendous effort to put together this event. And also I would like to thank Arik Burakovsky once again for bringing these really smart guys to our school. And now, just as a follow-up, we really have a lot of topic to be discussed. And we are open to create a platform, a group for a dialogue between the HSC and the Fletcher students. So this is like to be continued. This conversation is to be continued. Now I'd like to close this roundtable. Have a nice evening, and we're looking forward to see you at our next event. And thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.